G'day guys and gal. You'd think that the birthday of each chaos god would be pretty straightforward and almost universally well known and celebrated, like Christmas for evil people. However, it's actually one of the most complicated questions in all of 40k for two reasons. Firstly, GW has retconned the birth of the chaos gods like 5 times now, and secondly, the warp is said to be a timeless place, where everything that has been, is, and will be are all happening at the same time, which isn't actually accurate to the lore from what we have seen, but we'll have to discuss that in this video. So that technically means that the chaos gods have always existed, which means they don't have a birth date, yet they still do. It's a confusing mess that we will try to unravel today, going through each of the retcons and what the most accurate answer actually is. Before we get started, some time ago I told you guys that upon reaching 700k subs, I would do a drunk charity livestream, play some games, do some shots, talk shit, with all proceeds going to a charity of the community's choice. We are so damn close to reaching our target, only 1.4k subs away. We could theoretically reach it after this video. If it's your first time, I promise I won't let you down. If you've watched a bit but just haven't been bothered subscribing yet, doing so will help a charity, and if you are subscribed, mwah, sexy bitch, smack that bell. I've accepted that 700k will likely be this channel's final milestone, so I'm going all out for it. There is also a really awesome merch drop in production as well for 700k, but the main focus right now is the charity stream. So let's get there guys and gal, one last time. Today I'll go over the true birthdays of each chaos god and what actually birthed them. Let's get into it. The scale of 40k has increasingly grown over time, and a massive representation of that is the chaos gods. See, old lore stated that Khorne, Tzeentch, and Nurgle were born during key events in human history. Khorne was born during the medieval ages, fueled by events like the Crusades and the Mongol invasions, and just everyone's constant war boners during that time. Nurgle was born during the Black Plague, which, yep, checks out. Then Tzeentch was born during the Renaissance period, as it was a time of discovery, science, knowledge, and scheming. Now you may immediately see an issue here. These all-powerful cosmic galactic beings only coming into existence during early human events, whereas the rest of the galaxy and its various sentient races had been having wars, plagues, and science for millions of years before humanity's rise. So why didn't they spawn the chaos gods? Likewise, the birth of Slaanesh took the collective gangbanging of an entire psychic empire to manifest. So why does Slaanesh need so much juice to appear, whereas Khorne can just get a few dudes stabbing each other and poof, he's in? GW recognized this problem and retconned the birth of the chaos gods to actually take place just after the War in Heaven. The War in Heaven was a vicious long war between the Old Ones, Eldar, Orcs, and various sub-races versus the Necrons and the Catan. It saw countless worlds obliterated, gods throwing hands on the battlefield, and the warp itself being used as a weapon. It was due to the abuse of the warp, mostly at the hands of the Old Ones, that brought forth the realms of chaos, which acted as fertile grounds for the chaos gods to be born. In this version, there was not a set birth date for each chaos god. However, Khorne is often stated to be the oldest, which would make sense. He was the god of war, there was the War in Heaven, war god popping out first makes sense. The galaxy after the War in Heaven was heavily regressed, stagnant, and plagued with its own issues, a perfect breeding ground for Nurgle, who likely was born next. Then as the galaxy rebuilt and science and knowledge was recovered, Tzeentch would have been next. Now as all of these things happened over a very long period, each of these chaos gods births likely would not have blown a hole in the galaxy like Slaanesh's did. They would have slowly formed and grew. You also need to remember that the chaos gods do not own the warp. They have their realms of chaos which take up its own section of the warp. However, the Eldar gods were ascendant and kept the warp mostly clean for Eldar to die and then reincarnate from. The chaos gods were almost like carrion feeders, staying in the shadows and targeting distant civilizations rather than going for the big dogs like the Eldar. Now here's where it gets fucky. GW recently came out with lore that in my opinion is dog shit, that kind of retcons the chaos gods births again. See, it turns out that the chaos gods were actually around since the birth of the warp, which more or less happened as soon as sentient life evolved, thus making them a similar age to the Old Ones. The Old Ones would actually fight chaos alongside the Necron tier prior to the War in Heaven. The Old Ones were victorious, realizing that instead of banishing demons, if they instead trapped shitloads of them on special prison worlds, it would deprive the chaos god of a lot of power, as each demon is a shard of a chaos god, so losing their shards is like losing a part of themselves. After losing enough of these shards on these hidden prison worlds, the chaos gods backed off. Now to make it even more confusing, although Slaanesh was born during the fall of the Eldar in a very large event that re-tore open the Eye of Terror, as it was originally torn open during the War in Heaven, because of how time works, or doesn't work, in the warp, her demons were present during the wars against the Old Ones 60 million years prior, so Slaanesh technically existed in the warp prior to her own birth. Do I still have you? Okay, let's keep going. Now this lore is dumb as fuck, and the idea behind the warp being timeless is not only a massive cop-out to allow for GW to be lazier with their warp lore, but it's also just straight up wrong. When Nurgle captured Isha or Slaanesh consumed the Elder Gods, those happened on a pretty specific date in the timeline. Cain was a god, then was shattered, and now is a collection of demigods. Asuryan was the supreme Elder God of the warp, got eaten by Slaanesh, now he isn't anymore. Those are linear events. When the Emperor possessed Gilliman during Godblight and lit Nurgle's garden on fire, burning Nurgle himself, Nurgle is needed to take a timeout and recover before he becomes a threat again. If the warp was timeless, Nurgle always would have been burnt, or the garden would never recover, and so on. If Slaanesh has always existed even prior to her own birth, why wouldn't she consume the Elder Gods sooner? Why did she have to wait for a chronological event to do that? The answer is that there is no answer because it wasn't well thought out at all. So coming back to the Chaos Gods birthday question, if the Chaos Gods were born after the War in Heaven, which is likely, then they always existed, which is why their demons were able to manifest and fight the old ones prior to their own births. So do you list their birthday at the start of the warp, or do you list it after the War in Heaven? Now me constantly asking questions isn't very helpful, so I'm going to make an executive decision here. GW's warp timeless spaghetti lore is stupid, so we will mostly ignore it. The birth of Slaanesh was a canon timeline event that occurred in early M30. It released a psychic scream that was heard across the galaxy, blowing away numerous warp storms and allowing warp travel to resume, thus the Great Crusade to commence. It also obliterated the Eldar Empire and killed most of them, the only survivors being the Exodites as well as the Craftworlders who were far enough away. However, even these Eldar were not unaffected. Many still died, and those that survived were forever cursed. Their souls now owned and pledged to Slaanesh upon their death. Now subscribing to the theory that Khorne, Nurgle, and Tzeentch were born after the formation of the Realms of Chaos, which was after the War in Heaven, with whatever the old ones fought prior just being an echo of their birth reaching into the past, which I find way better lore than whatever the fuck GW tried to gaslight us with. Khorne, as in the lore and as it would make sense, would be the first to be born, either towards the tail end of the War in Heaven or just after it, all the bloodshed and suffering feeding into him. Now funnily enough, his birth could have been heralded by a huge galactic event or explosion. However, because the War in Heaven was full of galactic events and explosions, we just may not have heard about it because it was lost in the source. I mean, the War in Heaven literally features a scene of an uncharted war god Cain at full power fighting the uncharted Nightbringer at full power. Another Eye of Terror opening doesn't mean shit. What I do know is that Khorne would have needed to have waited for the old ones to either be extinct or almost extinct, as there's no way that those cosmic toads, who were the true masters of the warp, would allow a cancer like a Chaos God to thrive in the warp. Thus, Khorne's birth is around 60 million years ago. Nurgle would come after and is generally considered the second oldest, often called Grandfather Nurgle. Nurgle is like space aids and shit, sure, but he is also decay, rebirth, life cycles, and also entropy. A galaxy post-War in Heaven would be rapidly ripping through these cycles. Without the old ones to guide them, the races of the galaxy would be riddled with these themes. I can also imagine there would have been an especially nasty galactic plague that would have been the catalyst for Nurgle's birth, although there is nothing in the lore to 100% confirm that. As the galaxy stabilized after the War in Heaven, with the Eldar rising to dominance and technology and knowledge being rediscovered and invented, it would have been the perfect breeding ground for Tzeentch, and it's likely around this time he was also born. Now, even if the Chaos Gods were born a few million years apart, they were all still quite close to being the same age, as the War in Heaven was about 60 million years ago, so Khorne, Nurgle, and Tzeentch are about 50 to 60 million years old, with Slaanesh only being about 12,000 or so years old. Thus is often looked down upon by the other Chaos Gods for being the youngest. Now this raises another question that Warhammer seems to keep flipping on. Are the Chaos Gods a fundamental part of life that we can never truly rid ourselves of, or is it a sad irony of Warhammer that if we actually made peace and everyone stopped being genocidal maniacs, the Chaos Gods would die out? After all, Slaanesh was born well after civilizations had been around for millions of years, so clearly they were fine without her. Likewise, a civilization doesn't need war, plague, and schemes to thrive. If anything, those things 100% make it not thrive. I subscribe to the theory that chaos is very much beatable, and it's not even particularly difficult. It's just that sentient life, mostly humanity, chooses the wrong way to deal with it, like trying to put out a fire by throwing gasoline on it. Thus, we are the architects of our own suffering. Very grimdark. Ooh. Now, unfortunately, I can't give you an exact calendar date on when you should bake a cake for Khorne. However, I hope I have cleared up a lot of the confusion regarding the births of each Chaos God as a result of all the retcons and confusing lore. Or maybe I just confused you more. If you enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel, then subscribe. It's free, easy, and will literally help charity while getting me obliterated on a live stream. I see nothing but wins here. Join us for more memes, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.